The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap Jesus in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with the truth and show deference to no one. For you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, "Whose head is on this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Then Jesus said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
I invite you to be seated. Grace and peace. It's wonderful to see your faces this morning. I was recalling, as I read our gospel reading for today, a course I took at Pacific Lutheran University called Christology. Christology is how we interpret and understand the nature and the work of Christ. And the reason this was such a memorable course for me is that the professor explored different Christian theologies and explained that they tend to center one of the following aspects of Jesus' life: Jesus' birth, Jesus' life, his death, or his resurrection. Now, this was very interesting for me to consider because in our liturgical church year, we hold space around each of those stages, do we not? Not one of them, but all four. We're coming right up on Advent and Christmas, during which time we remember and revel in the incarnation of God in the birth of Jesus. During Lent and Holy Week, we remember Jesus' passion and his death. Easter and the ensuing season, we dwell with the mystery of his resurrection. And we are coming just toward the end of a very long green season following the festival of Pentecost. Pentecost season being one that slows things down so we can abide in what was actually an altogether brief but powerful ministry of this itinerant rabbi we call the Christ. It moves us through Jesus' stories and teachings and prayers and miracles of healing and nourishment. And while it may not contain quite the same drama or the powerful emotions of these other seasons I've listed, indeed, I would say I hear the least about Jesus' actual ministry in the public sphere of Christianity compared to his birth, death, and resurrection. But his life and ministry is full of unassuming treasure for our daily, ordinary lives. You'll notice, for example, these past few weeks particularly, that Jesus in teaching loves two things best, I'm going to say. One is parables, or storytelling. And in the past few weeks, we've gotten a lot of those, right? Jesus is a storyteller. And his other favorite thing to do is not answer questions. Today, we get not answering the question. To be fair, there's nothing inherently radical or transformative about not answering someone's question. It can be quite annoying in the wrong circumstances. But our text today introduces a very particular situation that some of you might recognize on a gut level. The question level today is one of entrapment. It's a gotcha question. It's even, our text says, malicious rather than sincere. Now, even when our context is not one of malice, consider how many questions we navigate daily that come with prescribed limits that already impose what your answer could possibly be or not. Consider how many questions demand a snappy, reductionist answer. How many questions cause your heart to clench a little with stress because they back you into a corner you don't want to be in. Jesus' opponents today precede their gotcha question with an interesting preamble. Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with the truth and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. This sounds kind, but is part of the strategy to back Jesus into a corner. Essentially, they're saying, we know you're not a political animal. You speak plainly and sincerely, not to please whatever audience you're currently in front of. They don't want Jesus to get slippery here, right? They really want this question to pin him down. The question of Roman taxation is absolutely a no-win situation, and they know it. However, here we find one of the first treasures in this text for us about who Jesus was and how he lived. And that is that they are actually speaking the truth about Jesus here. Jesus is sincere, and he does teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. And it is true that he does not regard people with partiality. He's not political in the sense that he neither seeks to gain or retain followers by appeasing his listeners with what he thinks they want to hear, nor is he motivated to appear edgy or radical to spark outrage or drama. And if you are as astounded and amazed as his listeners are by how poised he is here, it's likely because so few of us in our daily, ordinary lives access what we need to be so grounded and clear and sincere as Jesus. The pressure to say the right things at the right time to the right people can be overwhelming. The pressure to be engaged in social media and other globalizing realities that amplify the level of performance in our lives is strong, and the volume of that noise and static can make even those of us who desire to be sincere struggle to hear our own hearts and minds, much less the whispers of the Spirit moving in our lives. Even so cut off from ourselves, we receive these demands to speak. This first treasure is the reminder that Jesus throughout Scripture regularly takes the time he needs to draw back from the crowds to be alone with God. Beloved wisdom teacher Thich Nhat Hanh wrote that among all of our images of Jesus' passion and death, the crown of thorns, the crucifix, he wishes there were more icons for Christians today of Jesus seated in deep meditation and prayer, listening to God. What would that mean for Christians today to hold that image in our hearts and remember the sincerity of Christ? In our text, after this preamble, Jesus' opponents say, "Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay the emperor taxes or not?" Our text says that Jesus was aware of their malice, and he acknowledges it. "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites?" And herein lies a second treasure for us, already in these short verses. The power of observing out loud and for the benefit of all what is happening in the present moment. In Jesus' case, he speaks his objection to the motivation of their question, exposing an insidious dynamic they don't want exposed. However, it's what needs to happen to be clear in relationship in the moment. We too may encounter questions that are asked in overtly bad faith. However, I think it's more common that we are asked questions that unintentionally are slanted and narrowed to cut off the most life-giving potential for response. I support the reason that we say there's no such thing as bad questions, but I would also suggest that in fact, many questions are compromised from the root. They can limit or skew responses in unhelpful or even actively harmful ways. and that is not often enough named or even recognized. This feels increasingly common in our modern age of information overload and cognitive and emotional fatigue. We're just not asking as many good, honest questions as we used to, in good faith. It is in this sea of entrapping and reductionist setups that we too find ourselves stressed and pressed in conversation with one another. Yet we ourselves are complicit in this system, also harmed by it, and rarely make the important observations we need to get clear in the moment, to make explicit what is functioning implicitly, so that we can move more freely and healthfully together. Finally, while I started this sermon by saying Jesus doesn't answer the question posed to him, I didn't say he doesn't respond to the question. Adrienne Maree Brown, author of Emergent Strategy, Shaping Changing Worlds, writes this: "We live in a system that thrives when conditions are abundant and diverse, in a universe that holds contradictions and multitudes, and often we reject that chaotic fertility too soon, as if we can't tolerate the scale of our own collective brilliance." Jesus, in his sincerity, equanimity, and presence, holds contradictions and multitudes. To the question of his opponents, he says, "Give to the emperor what is the emperor's, and give to God the things that are God's." He does not accept the lose-lose parameters of their questions about imperial taxation, but rather asserts his own. That is to say, to put back to them, what is the spiritual significance for you of your answer to that question? What is the emperor's and what is God's? That is a question they will need to answer for themselves and with their people collectively. And this is the third treasure I think we find in just a few short verses of Jesus' life and ministry. Reshape the conversation. People of God, reshape the conversation. I remember from brief media training that I've had, never to answer the questions you're asked, but to answer the questions you want to answer. Perhaps a little like the strategy of chess as I understand it, don't play the other person's game or you're sunk. And I would say these are reminiscent of Jesus's MO here, but I want to be clear that as followers of Jesus, we are not playing games. And we're not looking to win. But in a world that does play games, and in the midst of people who are looking to win, we find wisdom in the way of Jesus exemplified here. First, cultivate and protect your sincerity in a world that will not make space for it. What spiritual practices nourish your rootedness in God and clarity in God's vision for humanity and for creation? What helps you locate yourself in your heart, in your mind, in your body, so that when the tests and pressures to please, influence, or dominate come, and they will, and they do, you can withstand them in humility and grace and purpose. Number 2, we learn to become aware of and name what is happening in the present moment. Slow down. What is implicit that could be made explicit? Where is the trap, the catch, the smallness of scope that leaves us hurting and stressed? What is choking the potential for life-giving and creative engagement in your response to what comes? And 3, stay connected and respond creatively. Offer mirrors back to those asking questions to invite their discernment. Reshape our culture of conversation to be one that softens and deepens, that invites us in good faith toward our collective brilliance. There are very real conundrums in our world that require moral and spiritual discernment, and no human should have to carry that weight on their own shoulders alone. I love that our liturgical seasons reflect on the birth, death, and resurrection of Christ. I increasingly cherish the wisdom of his life and his teaching. There we find invaluable inspiration in the model of his humanity, a light for the paths we walk, stumbling though we may be. So, fellow followers of Jesus, we are a people nourished by God's grace, imbued with creative dreams and a great capacity for expression, mutually committed to this beautiful world God so loves. Let's get out there and bring sincerity to a world that rewards cynicism and cleverness. Let's bring insight that wakes us up and raises our awareness to the layers of what's operating in the present moment. Let's reshape what is too narrow or prescriptive and recenter abundance and diversity, contradictions and multitudes, even when it starts to feel intolerable. In doing these things, we rediscover the humanity of Christ in ourselves and hold up a mirror to the humanity of Christ in others. Amen.